George Strait attends 100-year-old fans party. What he does leaves everyone in tears. The morning sun filtered through the thin curtains of room 23 at Green Meadows Nursing Home, casting gentle shadows across walls that told the story of a lifetime devoted to one man's music. Dorothy Wilson stirred in her narrow bed, her weathered hands instinctively reaching for the silver-frame photograph on her nightstand. George Strait's familiar smile looked back at her from beneath his signature cowboy hat, the same smile that had graced her bedside table for over 4 decades. At 99 years and 11 months old, Dorothy had outlived most of her contemporaries, her husband Harold, and even some of her younger friends. Her children lived scattered across distant states, their visits becoming increasingly rare as their own lives grew more complicated. But through every loss, every lonely evening, and every painful morning when arthritis reminded her of her age, George Strait's voice had been her constant companion. "Good morning, handsome," she whispered to the photograph, a ritual she had maintained since Harold's passing 22 years ago. Her voice, though frail, still carried traces of the strength that once commanded attention in the elementary school classrooms where she had taught music for 37 years. The walls of her modest room served as a shrine to the king of country music. Concert tickets from shows dating back to 1981 were carefully preserved in frames, each one representing a memory more precious than gold. There was the ticket from the Houston Livestock Show, where she had driven 4 hours alone in 1985, just to hear him sing "The Chair." Another from the San Antonio Rodeo in 1992, where she had taken her granddaughter, Amanda, for the first time, watching the little girl's eyes light up as George performed "Check Yes or No." Photographs covered every available surface. Dorothy with friends at various concerts, all of them beaming as they held up homemade signs professing their love for George. Magazine clippings yellowed with age were carefully preserved in scrapbooks that filled an entire shelf. Even a replica of George's guitar, purchased at a charity auction he had attended in the 90s, hung prominently on the wall above her television. The centerpiece of her collection was a tattered concert program from 1981, the first time she had ever seen George Strait perform. She had driven to Austin with her sister Mabel, God rest her soul, after hearing "Unwound" on the radio. Something about that song had stirred something deep within her, a recognition that this young man from Texas understood the complexities of love and loss in a way that spoke directly to her heart. "Dorothy, dear, time for your medication," called Janet, one of the younger nurses who had grown genuinely fond of the elderly woman's stories. Janet paused at the doorway, never failing to be amazed by the museum-like quality of Dorothy's room. "Still talking to Mr. Strait, I see." Dorothy chuckled softly, a sound like rustling leaves. "He's a good listener, that one. Never interrupts, never judges. Harold used to get jealous, you know, said I talked to George's picture more than I talked to him some days." "And did you?" Janet asked with a grin, helping Dorothy sit up and organizing her morning pills. "Well, George never left his socks on the floor or forgot to take out the garbage," Dorothy replied, with a mischievous twinkle in her pale blue eyes. The two women shared a laugh, one of the few genuine moments of joy Dorothy experienced in her daily routine. As Janet prepared to leave, Dorothy's expression grew more serious. "Janet, I know this might sound foolish coming from an old woman, but I've been thinking about my birthday next week." "Your 100th birthday, you mean? That's quite an achievement, Dorothy. The whole facility is planning something special. For you." Dorothy waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, I don't need much fuss, but I do have one wish, one dream I've carried for longer than I care to admit." She gestured toward her wall of memorabilia. "I know it's impossible, but I would give anything to meet George Strait, to hear him sing just one song, just for me." The longing in Dorothy's voice was palpable, and Janet felt her heart tighten. She had worked in nursing homes for 15 years and had learned to recognize the difference between idle wishes and the deep, soul-stirring dreams that elderly residents carried. This was clearly the latter. Now, if you're still with us, I want you to take a moment to imagine having one dream, one person who has been the soundtrack to your entire adult life. Before we continue with Dorothy's incredible journey, I want to ask you to do something for me. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, because stories like this remind us why connection and hope matter at any age. And please take a moment to comment below and tell me where you're watching from and what artist or song has been the soundtrack to your own life. Your stories inspire these stories, and I love hearing from each of you who makes this community so special. I've seen his concerts 37 times. Dorothy continued, her voice growing stronger as she spoke about her passion. I've driven hundreds of miles, spent money I probably shouldn't have spent, and collected every piece of his music ever recorded. Harold used to say I was crazy, but he always drove me to the concerts anyway. Said he'd rather have a wife who was passionate about something than one who wasn't passionate about anything. Janet sat down on the edge of the bed, sensing that Dorothy needed to share more than just her morning routine. Tell me about the first time you saw him perform. Dorothy's eyes lit up with a brightness that seemed to knock decades off her age. It was April 15th, 1981, at a little venue in Austin. I was 56 years old. Can you believe that? Most people think I've been listening to him since I was young, but I discovered him when I was already middle-aged. Mabel and I drove down together. She thought I was having some kind of midlife crisis. She laughed at the memory, her fingers tracing the edge of the old concert program. The venue was maybe half full. George was still relatively unknown outside of Texas, but when he walked out on that stage, when he started singing Unwound, I felt something I hadn't felt since I was a teenager. It wasn't romantic, you understand. I was happily married to Harold. It was something deeper than that. It was recognition. Recognition of what? Janet asked, genuinely curious. Recognition of truth, Dorothy replied simply. George sang about real life, about the way love actually works, about loss and hope and the simple dignity of ordinary people. He didn't try to be flashy or controversial. He just told stories that mattered. And for a woman who had spent her whole life teaching children, who had raised 3 kids and lived through everything from the Kennedy assassination to moon landings to personal tragedies, hearing someone acknowledge that ordinary life was worthy of beautiful music, well, it meant everything. Dorothy's voice began to waver with emotion. Every major event in my life since then has been marked by one of his songs. When my daughter got married, we played I Cross My Heart. When Harold died, they played Heartland at his funeral because it was our song. When Amanda graduated from college, she surprised me with tickets to see George in Dallas. Those weren't just concerts, Janet. They were the punctuation marks of my life. The room fell quiet, except for the distant sounds of breakfast preparation. In the dining hall, Janet found herself deeply moved by Dorothy's story, understanding now why the elderly woman's room resembled a shrine. This wasn't fandom in the typical sense. This was a lifelong relationship with an artist who had provided the soundtrack to Dorothy's most meaningful moments. What would you say to him if you met him? Janet asked softly. Dorothy considered the question seriously, her gnarled fingers still holding the old photograph. I would thank him, not just for the music, but for the consistency, for being the same genuine person year after year, for never changing his sound just to chase trends, for representing something steady and true in a world that seems to change. Too fast for an old woman to understand sometimes. She paused, looking directly at Janet with surprising intensity. But mostly, I would tell him that his music taught me that it's okay to feel deeply about simple things, that love doesn't have to be complicated to be profound, that there's dignity in staying true to yourself, whether you're a country music star or a retired music teacher in a nursing home. Janet wiped away a tear she hadn't realized was forming. Dorothy, your granddaughter Amanda is coming to visit today, isn't she? Maybe you should share this dream with her. Young people today are amazing with technology and social media. Maybe she could help make something happen for your birthday. Dorothy's expression shifted, revealing a vulnerability she rarely showed. Oh, I couldn't burden her with an old woman's foolish dreams. Amanda has her own life, her own problems. She's a good girl, but she's busy with her career and her new boyfriend. I don't want to seem like a silly old woman who doesn't understand that some dreams are just too big. Dorothy Wilson, Janet said firmly, standing up and adjusting her uniform. You are many things, but silly is not one of them. A woman who has loved consistently for 43 years, who has maintained hope and passion into her 10th decade of life, who has collected memories like treasures and shared joy. Wherever she goes, that woman is wise, not silly. Promise me you'll talk to Amanda about this. Before Dorothy could respond, a knock at the door interrupted their conversation. Amanda Wilson Martinez peeked her head around the corner, her youthful energy immediately brightening the room. At 32, she bore a strong resemblance to her grandmother, with the same determined chin and expressive eyes, though hers were enhanced by modern makeup and framed by stylishly cut brown hair. "Good morning, Grandma Dorothy," Amanda said, crossing the room quickly to plant a kiss on her grandmother's cheek. "I brought your favorite coffee cake from that bakery downtown, and I have some exciting news about your birthday party." Dorothy's face lit up at the sight of her granddaughter, but Janet noticed a subtle change in her demeanor. The vulnerable woman who had just shared her deepest dream transformed back into the protective grandmother who didn't want to burden her family with her wishes. "Oh, sweetheart, you didn't need to bring anything," Dorothy said, patting Amanda's hand. "Just having you here is gift enough." Amanda pulled up the room's single chair and sat close to her grandmother's bed. "Actually, Grandma, I've been thinking a lot about your 100th birthday. It's not just any birthday, you know. This is huge. I want to make sure we celebrate it properly." Janet excused herself quietly, but not before catching Dorothy's eye and giving her an encouraging nod. Dorothy understood the message. "Tell Amanda about George Strait." "Amanda, dear, I hope you're not planning anything too elaborate," Dorothy began carefully. "I'm just happy to have family around me." "That's exactly what I want to talk about," Amanda replied, her excitement evident. "I've been researching centenarian celebrations, and I think we should do something really special. Something that celebrates not just your age, but everything you've meant to our family and to the kids you taught over the years." Dorothy felt a flutter of hope mixed with apprehension. She glanced at the photograph of George Strait on her nightstand, then back at her granddaughter's eager face. Janet's words echoed in her mind. Some dreams weren't too big. Some women weren't too old to hope. "Amanda," Dorothy said slowly, her voice carrying a weight that made her granddaughter lean closer. "There is something I've been dreaming about. Something that would make this birthday more special than I ever dared imagine." Amanda's eyes widened with curiosity and concern. She had never heard her grandmother speak with such a mixture of hope and hesitation. "What is it, Grandma?" "You can tell me anything." Dorothy's gaze drifted to the wall of George Strait memorabilia, then back to her granddaughter's expectant face. "I know this will sound impossible, maybe even foolish, but my greatest wish for my 100th birthday would be to meet George Strait, to hear him sing just one song, just for me." The room fell silent. Amanda followed her grandmother's gaze to the shrine-like wall, suddenly understanding the depth of devotion she had observed her entire life, but never fully comprehended. Growing up, she had known her grandmother loved country music, but she had never realized it was more than casual entertainment. "Grandma," Amanda said carefully, "tell me more about why this matters so much to you." Dorothy's face transformed as she began to speak, decades of stored memories flowing like water from a broken dam. "Honey, George Strait's music has been the soundtrack to every important moment of my adult life. When your grandfather and I were struggling financially in the early 80s, Amarillo Morning would come on the radio and remind us that tough times don't last forever. When your mother was going through her difficult teenage years, Love Without End, Amen, helped me remember that parents' love is supposed to be unconditional." She paused, her voice growing softer. "When Harold was diagnosed with cancer, we would sit together in the evenings and I would play George's albums. Even when Harold was too weak to talk, he would squeeze my hand whenever I Can Still Make Cheyenne came on. That was our way of saying, 'I love you,' when words were too hard." Amanda felt tears forming in her eyes. She had been 15 when her grandfather died, old enough to remember the grief, but too young to understand the deeper currents of a 47-year marriage. "I never knew music meant so much to you both." "After Harold passed, I considered giving up on everything," Dorothy continued. "I was 78 years old, alone for the first time in my adult life, and I couldn't see the point of continuing. But then George released Troubadour, and there was this line about how the show must go on. Something about that song reminded me that life is performance, and even when your heart is breaking, you have to keep singing." Amanda reached over and took her grandmother's hand. "So you kept going to his concerts?" "Every single one I could manage," Dorothy said with a smile. "Even when my arthritis made it difficult to sit for long periods, even when gas prices got so high I had to choose between groceries and concert tickets. Your grandfather left me a small envelope of money with a note that said, 'For Dorothy's music adventures.' He knew I would need those concerts to keep going." The weight of her grandmother's story settled over Amanda like a warm blanket. She had always seen Dorothy as the strong, unshakable foundation of their family, never considering the private struggles and sources of strength that kept her going through decades of loss and change. "But Grandma, do you really think it's possible to meet someone that famous? I mean, he must get thousands of requests like this." Dorothy's expression shifted, revealing the vulnerability she had been trying to hide. "I know it's foolish, sweetheart. I know I'm just one old woman among millions of fans. But I'm running out of time to dream impossible dreams. Next week, I'll be 100 years old. How many more birthdays do I have left? If there was ever a time to ask for something extraordinary, isn't it now?" Amanda found herself deeply moved by her grandmother's logic. There was something both heartbreaking and inspiring about a nearly centenarian woman still believing in the possibility of magic. "What would you do if you actually met him?" "I would thank him," Dorothy said immediately, "not just for the entertainment, but for being a constant in an inconstant world. For 37 years I taught elementary school children, and I watched the world change in ways that sometimes frightened me. Technology, social media, the speed of everything. But George Strait remained the same genuine person, singing about timeless things like love, family, and staying true to yourself." She gestured toward her collection with pride, mixed with melancholy. "I would tell him that his music taught me that growing older doesn't mean giving up on passion, that it's okay to love something or someone with your whole heart, even if other people don't understand. That consistency is a form of heroism in a world that rewards constant change." Amanda stood up and walked closer to the wall of memorabilia, examining the concert tickets and photographs with new eyes. Each item represented not just a fan's dedication, but a woman's commitment to joy in the face of loss, to hope in the face of aging, to love in the face of loneliness. "Grandma, I want to try to make this happen," Amanda said suddenly, turning back to face Dorothy. "I don't know how, but I want to try." Dorothy's eyes filled with tears. "Oh, honey, I don't want you to feel obligated. I know it's impossible." "No, listen to me," Amanda said, sitting back down and taking both of her grandmother's hands. "You've spent your entire life taking care of other people. You raised 3 children, taught hundreds of students, took care of Grandpa through his illness, and you've been the rock of our entire family. If anyone deserves to have an impossible dream come true, it's you." The elderly woman looked at her granddaughter with a mixture of hope and fear. "But what if we try and nothing happens? What if it just makes the disappointment worse?" "Then we'll have tried," Amanda replied firmly, "and I'll know that I did everything I could to honor the woman who has given me a lifetime of unconditional love and support." Amanda pulled out her smartphone, her fingers already moving across the screen. "I'm going to start a social media campaign. I'm going to write letters to his management company, his record label, fan clubs, anyone who might be able to help. I'm going to tell your story, Grandma. I'm going to tell the world about a woman who has loved consistently for 43 years and deserves to have her dream come true." Dorothy watched her granddaughter's enthusiasm with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. "What will you say?" "I'll tell them about the 37 concerts, about the wall of memorabilia, about how you drove 4 hours alone to see him perform. I'll tell them about Grandpa's envelope of music adventure money and how George's songs helped you through cancer treatments and grief and loneliness. I'll tell them that you're about to turn 100 years old and that music has been your medicine for nearly half that time." As Amanda spoke, her ideas began to flow faster. "I'll use hashtags like #Dorothy 100 Meet George and Never Too Old to Dream. I'll share photos of you at concerts over the years, videos of you singing along to his songs. I'll make it impossible for people to ignore how genuine and pure your love for his music is." Dorothy felt a flutter of excitement mixed with terror. "What if people think I'm just a crazy old woman? Then they don't understand what real love looks like," Amanda replied without hesitation. "Grandma, you've maintained a passionate connection to something beautiful for over 4 decades. That's not crazy. That's inspiring." Over the next hour, Amanda and Dorothy went through the memorabilia collection together, with Dorothy sharing stories behind each item. There was the backstage pass from a charity event in 1995 where she had almost met George but had been too shy to approach him. There was a handwritten letter she had sent to his fan club in 1987, thanking him for a particular song that had helped her through a difficult period with her youngest son's drug problems. "I never sent most of the letters I wrote," Dorothy admitted, pulling out a shoebox filled with unsent correspondence. "I would write them when I was feeling overwhelmed or grateful, but I always convinced myself that he was too busy to care." About letters from an old school teacher. Amanda read through several of the letters, her respect for her grandmother growing with each page. The letters were beautifully written, thoughtful, and deeply personal without being intrusive. They revealed a woman who understood the difference between appreciating an artist and obsessing over a celebrity. "These are incredible, Grandma. They show exactly the kind of fan you are, someone who appreciates the artistry and the person behind the music." As the afternoon progressed, Amanda began taking photos and videos. She recorded Dorothy talking about her favorite George Strait songs, sharing stories about concerts she had attended, and explaining what his music had meant to her through various life challenges. Dorothy, initially self-conscious about being on camera, gradually relaxed as she talked about her passion. "Now seeing a little bit of Amarillo morning," Amanda encouraged, holding up her phone. Dorothy's voice, though aged and sometimes shaky, carried a sweetness that spoke of years spent singing to children and grandchildren. As she sang the familiar lyrics, her entire demeanor changed. She sat straighter, her eyes brightened, and For a moment, she seemed decades younger. "That's perfect, Grandma. People are going to see this and understand immediately why this matters so much." By the time visiting hours ended, Amanda had collected enough material to launch what she hoped would be a compelling social media campaign. She kissed her grandmother goodbye, promising to return the next day with updates on her progress. "Amanda," Dorothy called as her granddaughter reached the door. "Thank you for believing in an old woman's dream. Thank you for teaching me that it's never too late to hope for something beautiful," Amanda replied. That evening, back in her apartment, Amanda worked late into the night crafting the perfect social media posts. She wrote and rewrote captions, selected the most compelling photos, and created a strategy for reaching as many people as possible. She researched George Strait's management team, his record label contacts, and influential fan communities. Her first post went live at exactly 9 p.m., accompanied by a photo of Dorothy at a 1988 concert, young and beaming as she held up a sign that read, "George Strait makes everything better." The caption read, "This is my grandmother, Dorothy Wilson. She's about to turn 100 years old, and she has one birthday wish that seems impossible but feels necessary. For 43 years, she has been George Strait's most devoted fan, attending 37 concerts, collecting every album, and finding comfort in his music through every joy and sorrow of a long, beautiful life. Her dream is to meet her hero and hear him sing. Just one song. She deserves to have impossible dreams come true. Please share her story." Dorothy, 100, meet George. Never too old to dream. Within hours, the post had dozens of shares and hundreds of likes. Comments poured in from people sharing their own stories of elderly relatives with lifelong passions, offering support and encouragement. But as the days passed and the campaign gained modest traction without any official response, Amanda began to worry that her grandmother's dream really was impossible. 3 days before Dorothy's birthday, Amanda sat in the Green Meadows parking lot, staring at her phone and fighting back tears of frustration. Despite all her efforts, despite the hundreds of shares and thousands of supportive comments, no one from George Strait's team had responded. She was going to have to walk into that nursing home and tell her grandmother that sometimes even the most deserving dreams don't come true. But as she gathered her courage to deliver disappointing news, her phone rang with a number she didn't recognize. The voice on the other end would change everything, though Amanda had no way of knowing that the impossible was about to become inevitable. "Is this Amanda Wilson Martinez?" The voice was professional but warm, with a slight Texas accent that made Amanda's heart skip. "Yes, this is Amanda. Who is this?" "My name is Marcus Thompson, and I work with George Strait's management team. I'm calling about your grandmother, Dorothy Wilson." Amanda nearly dropped her phone. She had sent dozens of emails and made countless calls to various representatives, but she had never expected anyone to actually respond, especially not 3 days before the birthday party. "Oh my goodness," Amanda stammered. "I can't believe you're calling. I mean, I hoped someone would see our campaign, but I never actually thought." "Amanda, let me stop you there," Marcus interrupted gently. "Your grandmother's story has reached the right people, and I want you to know that what you've shared about her has moved a lot of folks here in Nashville. George himself has seen the videos you posted of Dorothy singing his songs." Amanda's hands began to shake. "He has? What did he think?" "He was moved, Amanda, deeply moved. We get a lot of requests for personal appearances, meet and greets, special occasions. Most of them are wonderful, but Dorothy's story is different. The longevity of her fandom, the genuine love she has for the music, and the fact that she's about to turn 100 years old, well, that's something special. Does this mean—" Amanda couldn't finish the question, afraid to hope. "It means we want to do something for Dorothy's birthday. Now, I need to ask you some questions to help us figure out the logistics. Where is the party being held? Amanda provided all the details about Green Meadows Nursing Home, the planned celebration, and the modest guest list. As she spoke, she could hardly believe this conversation was happening. Amanda, I need you to understand something important, Marcus continued. If we decide to move forward with this, it has to remain completely confidential. George doesn't do many personal appearances like this, and when he does, the surprise element is crucial. Can you keep this between us? Of course, absolutely. But can I ask, what exactly are you considering? I can't give you specifics yet, but I can tell you that George was particularly touched by the letters your grandmother wrote but never sent. The one about his music, helping her through her husband's cancer treatment. The one about how Troubadour gave her strength after Harold passed. Those letters show the kind of connection between artist and listener that every musician hopes for but rarely gets to witness. Amanda felt tears streaming down her face. She's going to be so happy. I mean, even if nothing comes of this, just knowing that he saw her story and cared enough to have someone call, that would mean the world to her. Amanda, here's what I need from you. Don't tell Dorothy about this call. Don't tell anyone at the nursing home. If this works out the way we're hoping, the surprise will be complete. And that's the only way this kind of thing works. Can you do that? Yes, I can do that. But can you tell me anything about what might happen? I can tell you that we're going to try to make Dorothy's birthday very special. That's all I can say right now. I'll be in touch with you tomorrow, with more details if everything falls into place. After Marcus hung up, Amanda sat in her car for 20 minutes, alternating between tears of joy and disbelief. She wanted desperately to call someone, to share this incredible news, but she had given her word to keep it secret. When she finally went inside to visit her grandmother, Dorothy immediately noticed her granddaughter's unusual energy. You seem different today, sweetheart. Excited about something? Amanda had to work hard to contain her enthusiasm. I'm just excited about your birthday party, Grandma. I think it's going to be more special than you expect. Oh, honey, I hope you haven't gone to too much trouble. I know the social media campaign didn't work out the way we hoped, but I want you to know how much it meant to me that you tried. The guilt of keeping the secret was almost overwhelming, but Amanda managed to redirect the conversation to other topics. They spent the afternoon looking through more of Dorothy's memorabilia, with the elderly woman sharing stories Amanda had never heard before. Did I ever tell you about the time I almost met George at that charity auction in 1995? Dorothy asked, pulling out a program from the event. No, what happened? Well, I had saved up for months to attend this auction benefiting children's music programs. George was there to donate some items and perform a few songs. After his performance, he was mingling with the donors, and I was standing maybe 10 feet away from him. Dorothy's eyes grew distant with the memory. He was talking to this wealthy couple about their contribution to the cause, and I thought about walking over and introducing myself. I had brought one of his albums to get signed, and I had prepared what I was going to say in my head 100 times. But you didn't approach him. I lost my nerve, Dorothy admitted with a rueful smile. Here was this man whose music had carried me through so many difficult times, standing right there, and I couldn't work up the courage to say hello. I kept thinking that he must meet so many fans, that my story wasn't special enough to take up his time. What did you do instead? I bid on the guitar he donated, Dorothy said, gesturing toward the instrument hanging on her wall. I spent more money than I should have, but I wanted something he had actually touched, something that connected me to him, even if I couldn't make the personal connection. Amanda looked at the guitar with new understanding. It wasn't just a piece of memorabilia. It was a symbol of her grandmother's lifelong struggle between devotion and modesty, between love and fear of rejection. Do you regret not talking to him that day? Dorothy considered the question seriously. I used to. For years, I would replay that moment and imagine what I should have said. But as I got older, I realized that sometimes the relationship you have with someone's art is more important than meeting the person. George Strait's music has been my companion for over 4 decades. Meeting him couldn't make that relationship any more real or meaningful. But you still dream about it, Amanda pointed out. Yes, I do, Dorothy acknowledged. I suppose there's a difference between needing to meet someone and wanting to meet them. I don't need to meet George to validate my love for his music, but I would love the chance to thank him, person to person, for everything his songs have given me. That evening, after Amanda left, Dorothy sat alone in her room, surrounded by the artifacts of her devotion. She picked up one of the unsent letters and read it again, remembering the emotional state that had prompted her to write it. The letter was dated December 15th, 2005, just 3 months after Harold's death. In it, she had tried to express how George's music was helping her navigate the overwhelming loneliness of widowhood. She had written about playing his albums in the empty house, about how certain songs could transport her back to happier times with Harold, about how the continuity of George's career gave her something stable to hold on to when everything else felt uncertain. As she reread her own words, Dorothy was struck by how honest and articulate she had been in expressing her grief and gratitude. These letters weren't the ramblings of a starstruck fan. They were the thoughtful communications of a woman who understood the healing power of music and wanted to acknowledge the artist who had provided that healing. Meanwhile, 800 miles away in Nashville, George Strait sat in his home office, reviewing the materials his team had compiled about Dorothy Wilson. He had watched Amanda's videos multiple times, read the social media posts about Dorothy's 43 years of fandom, and studied the photographs of her at concerts spanning nearly 5 decades. What struck him most weren't the statistics of her devotion, impressive as they were, but the quality of her appreciation. In the videos, Dorothy didn't talk about George as a celebrity or even as a person she wanted to meet. She talked about his music as a living presence in her life, as something that had grown and evolved alongside her own experiences. George had been performing for over 4 decades himself, and he had met thousands of fans in that time. Most were wonderful people who genuinely loved his music, but few could articulate why that music mattered to them beyond simple enjoyment. Dorothy was different. She understood the deeper purpose of country music, its role as a mirror for ordinary life and its power to transform personal pain into shared understanding. The letter about Harold's cancer treatment had particularly moved him. Dorothy had written about sitting beside her husband's hospital bed, playing George's songs softly on a portable radio, watching Harold's face relax as familiar melodies filled the sterile room. She described how "I Can Still Make Cheyenne" had become their private code for "I love you" when speaking became too difficult for Harold. Most people don't understand that music isn't just entertainment, Dorothy had written in that unsent letter. It's a language for feelings we can't express any other way. Your songs gave Harold and me a way to say goodbye that was bigger than words, more beautiful than our fear. George had been in the music business long enough to become somewhat cynical about fan interactions, but Dorothy's story reminded him why he had started singing in the first place. She represented the best possibility of what could happen when an artist's work truly connected with someone's life. His assistant knocked on the office door. "George, Marcus is here with the final details about the Dorothy Wilson surprise." Marcus entered, carrying a folder full of logistics and contingency plans. "We've worked out all the details with the nursing home director. He's been incredibly cooperative, and he assures us that Dorothy has no idea what's being planned." "What About the granddaughter, can she keep the secret for 2 more days? Amanda is solid. She understands how important the surprise element is, and she's committed to making sure Dorothy doesn't suspect anything. George reviewed the plan one more time. It was ambitious for such short notice, but his team had pulled together bigger surprises with less time. The key was maintaining absolute secrecy while coordinating multiple moving parts. "I want to make sure we do this right," George said. "This isn't just a publicity opportunity or a good deed. This is about honoring a woman who represents the best of what music can mean to people. Dorothy Wilson has loved my music for 43 years, and she deserves something extraordinary." "The nursing home staff thinks we're just bringing in a local musician for entertainment," Marcus confirmed. "Only the director knows the truth, and he's sworn to secrecy. Even Amanda doesn't know the full extent of what we're planning." "Good. What about the media? Are we going to document this?" Marcus hesitated. "That's your call, George. We could have a photographer there discreetly, maybe get some footage for social media later. But honestly, I think this might be one of those moments that's more powerful if it stays private." George nodded in agreement. "You're right. This is for Dorothy, not for publicity. If she wants to share the story afterward, that's her choice. But the moment itself should be just about making her dream come true." As the final preparations continued, none of them could have anticipated that Dorothy's birthday surprise would become something even more meaningful than anyone had planned. The connections that would be revealed, the emotions that would be stirred, and the impact that would ripple far beyond a small nursing home in Texas were still 2 days away from changing everyone involved. But for now, the secret held, the plans proceeded, and an impossible dream moved steadily toward becoming reality. The morning of Dorothy's 100th birthday dawned gray and humid, typical for East Texas in late spring. Dorothy woke feeling unusually melancholy, her arthritis more painful than usual, her heart heavy with the weight of reaching such an extraordinary milestone, with so few people left to share it. 100 years, she whispered to George's photograph, as she had every morning for over 2 decades. "Harold, I wish you were here to see this day." Janet arrived earlier than usual to help Dorothy prepare for her party. The elderly woman had chosen her favorite dress, a navy blue outfit with tiny white flowers that Harold had bought for her 70th birthday. It still fit, though it hung looser now on her diminished frame. "You look beautiful, Dorothy," Janet said as she helped with the finishing touches. "Are you excited about your party?" "I suppose I should be," Dorothy replied, trying to muster enthusiasm she didn't feel. "Amanda has worked so hard to make this special. I just wish I had more energy to appreciate it properly." "Well, maybe the party will give you energy," Janet suggested, though she noticed Dorothy's unusual lack of spirit. Sometimes celebrations can surprise us with how much joy they bring. Meanwhile, Amanda was dealing with her own emotional turmoil. She had received 2 more calls from Marcus Thompson, confirming that everything was still on schedule, but the weight of keeping such an enormous secret from her grandmother was becoming almost unbearable. Every time Dorothy expressed even mild disappointment about her birthday, Amanda wanted to shout that the most incredible surprise was waiting just hours away. At Green Meadows, Mr. Thompson, the facility director, was coordinating final preparations with nervous energy. He had been running nursing homes for 20 years, but he had never been involved in keeping a secret this significant. George Strait's security team had arrived early to sweep the building and coordinate logistics, posing as maintenance workers to avoid drawing attention. "Everything needs to look completely normal until the moment of the surprise," the head of security explained to Mr. Thompson. "Mrs. Wilson cannot suspect anything unusual is happening." At 2 o'clock, Dorothy's small party began in the facility's main dining room. About 15 people were present. Amanda and her boyfriend David, a few residents from the nursing home, several staff members who had grown fond of Dorothy over the years, and two cousins who had driven in from Houston. The decorations were modest but heartfelt. Balloons, a banner reading "Happy 100th Birthday Dorothy," and a small sheet cake with candles arranged in the shape of 100. Dorothy sat at the head of the table in her wheelchair, smiling politely but clearly struggling to engage with the celebration. "Before we sing Happy Birthday, I'd like to say a few words," Amanda announced, standing up and looking around the room. The secret she was keeping made her voice shake slightly. "Grandma Dorothy has been the foundation of our family for as long as I can remember. She taught elementary school for 37 years, raised 3 children, and has been a source of wisdom and strength for everyone who knows her." Amanda paused, fighting back tears that had nothing to do with sadness. "She's also taught us that it's never too late to have dreams, to love something passionately, and to believe in the possibility of magic. Today, as we celebrate her incredible 100 years of life, I want her to know that some dreams are worth waiting for." Dorothy looked puzzled by the emotional intensity of Amanda's speech, but before she could respond, Mr. Thompson stepped forward. "Dorothy, we have a small surprise for you before we cut the cake," he announced, his voice betraying his own excitement. "We've arranged for some musical entertainment for your special day." Dorothy's face brightened slightly. "Oh, that's very thoughtful. I do love music." "We thought you might," Mr. Thompson said with a mysterious smile. "The performers should be here any minute. In fact, I think I hear them arriving now." From somewhere in the building came the sound of footsteps in the hallway, though Dorothy couldn't see who was approaching. Amanda gripped David's hand so tightly he winced, her heart pounding, as the moment she had dreamed about finally arrived. The dining room doors opened, and a man carrying a guitar case entered, followed by someone wearing a cowboy hat whose face was initially obscured by shadows. Dorothy glanced at them casually, assuming they were local musicians hired by the nursing home. But as the second figure stepped fully into the light, Dorothy's world stopped. George Strait, wearing his characteristic black hat and a gentle smile, walked directly toward her table. The room fell completely silent, except for Dorothy's sharp intake of breath. "I heard there's a young lady here celebrating her 100th birthday," George said in the warm, familiar voice that had been Dorothy's companion for 4 decades. "I was hoping she might let me sing her a song or two." Dorothy's hands flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with disbelief. For a moment, it seemed she might faint from shock. Amanda rushed to her grandmother's side, steadying her wheelchair, while tears streamed down both their faces. I can't. This isn't real," Dorothy stammered, looking back and forth between George and Amanda. "This can't be real." George knelt down beside Dorothy's wheelchair, bringing himself to her eye level. "It's real, Mrs. Wilson. I'm George Strait, and I'm here because a remarkable granddaughter told me about a remarkable grandmother who has been listening to my music for 43 years. You know who I am," Dorothy whispered, still unable to fully process what was happening. "I know all about you, Dorothy. I know you've been to 37 of my concerts. I know you have every album I've ever recorded. I know you wrote beautiful letters to me that you never sent. And I know that my music has been with you through some of the most important moments of your life." Dorothy began to sob, not from sadness, but from overwhelming joy mixed with disbelief. "I can't believe you're really here. I can't believe you know about me. Dorothy, I want you to know something," George continued, his own voice thick with emotion. "In 40 years of making music, I've met thousands of fans, but I've never heard a story that moved me more than yours. The letters you wrote about Harold, about how music helped you through grief and loneliness, about finding strength in songs during the hardest times of your life, those letters reminded me why I became a musician in the first place." The room remained silent, everyone transfixed by the intimate conversation unfolding before them. Even the nursing home residents, who didn't fully understand who George Strait was, could sense they were witnessing something extraordinary. "I brought my friend Jake here with me," George said, gesturing to the guitarist who had accompanied him. "We thought you might like to hear some of your favorite songs." "I don't know what to say," Dorothy managed through her tears. "This is the most beautiful thing that has ever happened to me." George stood up and took his position near the small, cleared area that served as an improvised stage. "Well, then let's make some music together. What would you like to hear first?" "Amarillo Morning," Dorothy said without hesitation. "That was the first song of yours that made me cry." George smiled and nodded to Jake, who began the familiar opening chords. As George's voice filled the dining room, Dorothy closed her eyes and let the music wash over her. This wasn't just a performance, it was a culmination of decades of devotion, a dream made manifest, a moment that seemed to exist outside of normal time. When the song ended, George looked directly at Dorothy. "That was beautiful, but I think we can do better. Would you sing the next one with me?" Dorothy's eyes widened. "Oh, I couldn't. My voice isn't what it used to be." "Neither is mine," George replied with a laugh. "But I bet we sound pretty good together. How about the chair?" As Jake began the introduction to one of George's most beloved songs, Dorothy found herself singing along softly at first, then with growing confidence. Her voice, though aged, carried a sweetness and sincerity that perfectly complemented George's more polished delivery. The duet was magical, not because of technical perfection, but because of its emotional authenticity. Here was a woman who had sung along to this song hundreds of times in private, finally sharing it with the man who had written and recorded it. The intimacy of the moment brought tears to every eye in the room. After they finished, George sat down in a chair next to Dorothy's wheelchair. "Dorothy, I have something for you." He reached into a bag that Jake had been carrying and pulled out a guitar. But this wasn't just any guitar. It was one of George's own performance instruments, worn smooth by years of use, bearing the signatures and scratches that came from a lifetime of making music. "This guitar has been with me for 15 years, George explained. "It's been on stage for hundreds of concerts, recorded dozens of albums, and traveled all over the world. I want you to have it." Dorothy stared at the instrument in wonder. "I can't accept something so valuable. This is your guitar." "And now it's yours," George insisted, placing it carefully in her lap. "A guitar is meant to make music, to bring joy, to connect people. I can't think of anyone who deserves to have it more than someone who has understood the true meaning of music for so many years." But George wasn't finished with his surprises. "Dorothy, there's something else I want to share with you. When I read your letters, especially the one about being a music teacher, something seemed familiar about your name. So I did a little research." Dorothy looked puzzled, unsure where this was leading. "Did you teach at Lincoln Elementary School in Huntsville from 1968 to 1972? "Yes, I did," Dorothy replied slowly. "Why do you ask?" George's smile grew wider. "Because during that time, you taught a boy named Tommy Strait, my cousin Tommy. He used to come home from school talking about his music teacher, Mrs. Wilson, who made learning fun and who believed that every child had musical potential, even the ones who seemed tone-deaf." The room erupted in gasps and exclamations as the incredible coincidence was revealed. Dorothy's hands flew to her face again, this time in recognition rather than disbelief. "Tommy Strait," she whispered. "Sweet little Tommy, with the crooked smile and the enthusiasm for singing, even though he couldn't carry a tune in a bucket." "That was your cousin?" "That was my cousin," George confirmed, "and he told me that you were the teacher who convinced him that music was about more than being perfect. You told him that music was about expressing feelings, about connecting with other people, about finding joy, even when things were difficult." Dorothy was crying again, but now her tears were accompanied by laughter. I remember Tommy so clearly. He was one of my favorite students because he tried so hard and because he never let being off-key stop him from singing with enthusiasm. Well, Tommy grew up to be a successful businessman, but he never lost his love for music. And when he heard I was coming to see you, he asked me to give you a message. George paused, letting the moment build. He said to tell Mrs. Wilson that she was right about music being more important than perfection, and that lesson helped shape how he approached everything in his life. The connection between Dorothy and George was no longer just between fan and artist. It was between teacher and the cousin of her former student, between two people whose lives had intersected decades before either realized it. The birthday surprise had become something even more meaningful than anyone could have planned. "This is the most incredible day of my life," Dorothy said, holding George's guitar and looking around the room at the faces of everyone who had been part of making this moment possible. "I feel like I'm living in a beautiful dream." "It's not a dream, Dorothy," George assured her, "and it's not over yet. I have one more surprise for you." Dorothy looked at him with wonder, hardly believing that there could be anything more magical than what had already transpired. George reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope, cream-colored and bearing his personal letterhead. "Dorothy, I know you've attended 37 of my concerts over the years, but I want to invite you to one more. I'm performing at the Houston Rodeo next month, and I would be honored if you would be my special guest." The room buzzed with excited whispers, but Dorothy looked uncertain. "Oh, George, that's incredibly generous, but I'm not sure I'm strong enough to travel anymore. I haven't been to a concert in over 3 years. That's why this invitation is different," George continued with a smile. "I'm not just inviting you to attend the concert. I'm inviting you to watch from the side of the stage in a comfortable chair with medical staff nearby if you need anything. And Amanda, you're invited too, of course." Amanda gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. She had dreamed of seeing George Strait perform her entire life, but had never been able to afford concert tickets. "But wait," George said, holding up his hand. "There's more. During the concert, I want to dedicate a song to you, Dorothy. I want 20,000 people to know about the woman who has shown me what it truly means to love music for a lifetime." Dorothy began crying again, overwhelmed by the generosity and thoughtfulness of the gesture. "I don't know what I did to deserve all this kindness." "You loved music the way it's meant to be loved," George replied simply. "You let it into your heart during the good times and the bad times. You understood that songs aren't just entertainment, they're companions. They're medicine, they're memory keepers." He paused, looking around the room at all the faces watching this extraordinary exchange. "Dorothy, I want to tell you something that I've never told any other fan. When I started in this business, people told me that country music was dying, that young people didn't want to hear traditional stories about real life. But fans like you proved them wrong. You showed me that authentic music never goes out of style because human emotions never go out of style." George stood up and addressed the entire room. "Everyone here today has witnessed something special. You've seen what happens when someone loves purely and consistently for over 4 decades. Dorothy Wilson isn't just a fan. She's a reminder of why we make music in the first place." He turned back to Dorothy, his voice growing softer and more personal. "I want you to know that meeting you today has meant as much to me as it has to you. In a business that can sometimes feel shallow and commercial, you've reminded me of the sacred connection between artist and listener. You've reminded me why I fell in love with country music when I was a young man in Texas." Dorothy reached out and took George's hand, her wrinkled fingers surprisingly strong as they gripped his. "George, I need to tell you something too. For 43 years, your music has been my anchor in storms I couldn't have weathered alone. When Harold was sick, when my children moved away, when friends passed on and the world started feeling too big and too fast, your songs reminded me that I wasn't alone. Her voice grew stronger as she continued. You gave me a language for feelings I couldn't express on my own. You helped me understand that getting older doesn't mean giving up on beauty, that love can take many forms, and that there's dignity in simple, honest emotions. The entire room was silent, transfixed by the profound exchange between the country music legend and the centenarian fan. Even the nursing home residents who had been skeptical about the fuss surrounding Dorothy's birthday were now completely absorbed in the moment. "And there's something else I want to share with everyone," Dorothy announced, her voice carrying a strength that hadn't been there when the day began. "This morning, I woke up feeling sorry for myself. I thought about all the people who weren't here to celebrate with me, all the things I can't do anymore because of my age. I almost asked Amanda to cancel the party because I didn't think I had the energy to pretend to be happy." She looked around the room, making eye contact with each person present. "But this experience has taught me something important about the difference between being old and being finished. I may be 100 years old, but today I feel more alive than I have in years. Dreams don't have expiration dates, and it's never too late for magic to happen in your life." Amanda wiped away tears as she watched her grandmother transform before everyone's eyes. The melancholy woman who had struggled to get dressed that morning had been replaced by someone radiant with joy and purpose. "George, I want to make you a promise," Dorothy continued. "I'm going to be at that Houston rodeo concert. Even if I have to use a wheelchair, even if I need oxygen, even if it's the last concert I ever attend, I will be there. Because today, you've given me something more valuable than a birthday surprise. You've given me proof that life can still hold wonders, even at 100 years old." George squeezed her hand gently. "Dorothy, I'm going to hold you to that promise, and I want to make you a promise in return. As long as I'm performing, there will always be a place for you at my concerts. You're not just a fan anymore, you're family." The emotional weight of the moment was almost overwhelming, but George had one final gesture to make. He nodded to Jake, who began playing the opening chords to "I Cross My Heart," one of George's most beloved ballads. "This song is about promises and commitment," George said as the music began. "It's about love that lasts through time and circumstances. Dorothy, this song is for you and Harold, for 47 years of marriage and for your 43 years of faithful love for music." As George sang, Dorothy closed her eyes and swayed gently in her wheelchair. For a moment, she could almost feel Harold beside her, could almost believe they were young again, dancing in their small living room while the radio played their favorite songs. When the song ended, the room erupted in applause, but Dorothy was lost in her own world of memories and gratitude. She opened her eyes to find George kneeling beside her chair again. "Thank you," she whispered, the words carrying the weight of 4 decades of appreciation. "Thank you, Dorothy," George replied. "Thank you for showing me what it means to be a true fan. Thank you for loving music the way it deserves to be loved." As the formal part of the celebration concluded, George spent another hour at the nursing home, talking with Dorothy about her memories, meeting the other residents and signing autographs for the staff. He listened intently as Dorothy shared stories about individual concerts she had attended, about how different songs had marked different periods of her life, and about her late husband's gradual acceptance of her passion for country music. "Harold used to joke that he was married to me and George Strait," Dorothy laughed, showing George a photograph of herself and Harold at a concert in the 90s. "But he also said that watching me enjoy your music made him happy, because it proved I still had the capacity for joy, even when life got difficult." George studied the photograph, seeing Dorothy decades younger, but with the same bright eyes and genuine smile. "He sounds like a wise man." He was, and he would have loved meeting you today. He always said that any man who could make his wife that happy for that many years had to be worth knowing. As the afternoon wound down, George prepared to leave, but not before ensuring that all the arrangements for Dorothy's Houston concert appearance were confirmed. He personally spoke with the nursing home's medical staff about what accommodations would be needed and arranged for a private car service to transport Dorothy and Amanda to and from the venue. "I'll see you in Houston," George promised as he prepared to go. "You will," Dorothy replied with absolute certainty. "Wild horses couldn't keep me away." After George left, the nursing home buzzed with excitement and disbelief. Word of the surprise visit spread quickly through the facility, and Dorothy found herself surrounded by residents and staff members who wanted to hear every detail of her experience. "I still can't believe it really happened," she told Janet later that evening. "I keep thinking I'm going to wake up and find out it was all a beautiful dream." "It was real, Dorothy, and you deserve every magical moment of it." That evening, Amanda helped her grandmother carefully place George's guitar in a place of honor in her room, right next to Harold's photograph and the collection of memorabilia that had grown over 4 decades. "Grandma, I have to ask you something," Amanda said, as they arranged the new addition to Dorothy's shrine. "How do you feel? I mean, really feel after today?" Dorothy considered the question carefully, her fingers tracing the strings of George's guitar. "I feel grateful, of course, but more than that, I feel validated. For so many years, people looked at my collection, at my enthusiasm for George's music, and they thought it was a little excessive for a woman my age. Even I sometimes wondered if I was being foolish." She paused, looking around her room with new eyes. "But today, George himself told me that the way I love music is the way it's meant to be loved. He made me understand that there's nothing silly or excessive about passionate appreciation. If anything, the world needs more people who are willing to love something purely and consistently." "What do you think Grandpa would say about today?" Dorothy smiled, picking up Harold's photograph. "He would say, 'I told you so.' Harold always believed that good things happen to good people, even if they have to wait a long time for them. He would be so proud that his Dorothy finally got to meet her hero." 3 weeks later, Dorothy kept her promise. Despite the challenges of traveling at her age, despite the crowds and noise that would normally overwhelm her, she attended George Strait's Houston Rodeo concert. From her special chair at the side of the stage, she watched as he performed for 20,000 screaming fans. Midway through the concert, George paused and looked directly at her. "Ladies and gentlemen, I want to introduce you to someone very special. This is Dorothy Wilson, and today she turns 121 days old. Dorothy has been coming to my concerts for over 4 decades. And she represents everything that's beautiful about the relationship between music and the people who love it." The crowd erupted in cheers as a spotlight found Dorothy, who waved shyly from her chair. This next song is dedicated to Dorothy and to everyone like her who understands that music isn't just something you hear, it's something you feel. This is Troubadour. As George sang the song that had given Dorothy strength after Harold's death, she closed her eyes and let the music wash over her one more time. Surrounded by thousands of people but feeling intimately connected to the man on stage, she understood that this moment was the perfect culmination of a lifelong love affair with music. After the concert, Dorothy lived for 6 more months, passing peacefully in her sleep on a quiet Tuesday morning. Her obituary, written by Amanda, mentioned her 47-year marriage, her 37 years of teaching, her 3 children and 5 grandchildren, and her extraordinary friendship with George Strait. At her funeral, played at her specific request, was a recording of George singing "I Cross My Heart," the song he had performed at her 100th birthday celebration. As the familiar melody filled the church, everyone present understood that they had witnessed something rare, a life lived with passion, consistency, and the courage to dream impossible dreams. George Strait attended Dorothy's funeral, standing quietly in the back of the church, paying his respects to a woman who had taught him as much about the power of music as he had ever taught her. On her grave marker, along with the traditional information, was inscribed a simple phrase: "She loved music the way it was meant to be loved." Dorothy Wilson's story became legend in the country music community, not because of the celebrity surprise or the media attention, but because it represented the sacred bond between artist and audience that makes music meaningful. Her life proved that it's never too late for dreams to come true, that genuine love never goes unrewarded, and that sometimes the most extraordinary things happen to the most ordinary people. In the end, Dorothy got much more than her impossible dream of meeting George Strait. She got validation for a lifetime of passionate appreciation. She got to experience the magic that happens when someone's hero becomes their friend. And she got to prove that at 100 years old, life can still hold the most beautiful surprises.